Hello viewers and a warm welcome to the show this evening. My name is Chef Andy and I'm of course going to be introducing our guest very shortly. We are of course going to be working on a very simple dish that I managed to convince her to make a point once more to turn up for the show today. And before I proceed to introduce the ingredients before us, I will allow her to of course introduce herself and say hello to the viewers at home.
Hello, my name is Slyvia Wambui, Kingori. People like to call me Sly Kings.
Sly works, yeah?
Yeah, Sly works. Yeah, I have a passion for cooking.
Okay.
I love cooking so much. And I'm currently in University of Nairobi.
All right. So, ladies and gentlemen, as you've heard, we're going to be taking it nice and easy today. Something very local most of you have probably tried at home. But for those of you who are of course going to be taking a new perception or a new version of this particular simple recipe, then this is the show for you. Now before we begin, I'll of course introduce the ingredients before us just to give you an idea of what to expect for the show today. Now from the very front, you will of course require about 2 teaspoons of cumin, about 1 teaspoon of chili flakes, a few sprigs of some fresh thyme, and about 2 teaspoons of some tomato paste. You're also going to require about 150 grams of some beef steak chopped into cubes, about half a cup of some frozen peas, about 2 pieces of carrot which are already grated. You're also going to require about 3-4 pieces of potatoes cut into 1-inch cubes, about 1.5 onions, white or red does not particularly make a difference. You also require some salt for seasoning and some fresh coriander, about 7 to 8 pieces of some peeled green banana, some turmeric powder just to aid in color, some oil to cook with, some paprika just to give it a bit of heat, some black peppercorns to crush in, and last but not least, some water to aid us in cooking our bananas. But before we begin, we'll of course give you this chance to sit back and relax, and we'll catch you after a very short break. Hello viewers and welcome back to the show. Now if you've of course just tuned in, we are going to be working on a very simple green banana recipe, or also by the local term Matoke. We're also going to be incorporating some beautiful flavors to this very simple dish, and I hope you all will enjoy. Now to begin the process, we're going to of course begin by cooking our bananas. So Sly will do us a favor of lighting the gas for us. And now we're going to begin by cooking our bananas in some water, of course. We're pretty much not going to season anything at this stage. We're going to be taking it nice and easy today. Something very local most of you have probably tried at home, that we are going to have worked on a little earlier. By the time the bananas are done, we're just going to incorporate this too, and it's as simple as done. Now something also to mention, it's a very simple recipe that you can of course make in one pot if you prefer. You can of course cook it in 2 or 3 pots if you're looking at a very different consistency. On most occasions, most of you at home would probably begin by cooking the bananas and going right for it, but we're going to of course cook the bananas briefly and then add this to the rest of our mixture. Thank you very much, Sly. Now, next thing we're going to be doing is we're going to be making the sauce that we'll be adding our bananas to. Now, I don't know if you've made green bananas before.
Okay, I have, but I've not heard of adding some sauce or
Exactly.
local.
A very local one.
Yeah.
All right, so we're going to begin the process by heating up our pot here. And I'm going to hand you this beautiful tool that you'll be using to stir. Now to begin this very simple recipe, I'm going to first chop up some white onion. We're going to be using about 1.5 pieces, or if you like, you can use also red onion. So I'll begin by adding about 1 tablespoon of oil. Right, now as that continues to heat up, we're going to begin this very simple process by browning our meat. Now, by the browning term, we of course refer to giving the meat a bit of color, which of course means cooking it at high heat and then of course incorporating it to your dish a little later. So what we're going to do is we're going to cook the meat in some high heat. So I'm going to add those in there.
Will it be the same as boiling the meat?
No, it won't be the same as boiling, but the effects we are looking for are similar. We're basically sterilizing the meat. So we're going to basically fry up the meat. I'm also going to proceed to chop up some of our ingredients, but of course do bear with us that of course the process of cooking this on the pot may actually be a little louder, so we may of course have to raise our voices in between the process. Now of course to that we're going to simply proceed to quarter our white onion. Simple as that. Next, proceed to also chop up your carrot nice and chunky. This is basically just giving our green banana a nice beautiful consistency to it. Remember, of course, chopping up your ingredients very, very small may make it a little harder for you to achieve that. So we're going to cut this into some beautiful chunks which are going to be nice and visual. Now we're also going to be incorporating our potatoes into our bananas. So because we are boiling them together, we're just going to add our potatoes as well. Now remember, this is of course it's not going to cook until it's very mushy. We're just going to cook it until it's nice and soft, and then we'll add it to the pot on the side. Now as Sly continues to do so, very important that I mention, on occasion that you're working with green bananas, I'm actually going to show you an example. So on occasion that you're working with green bananas, very, very important that you make sure that it's nice and easy to work with. Now one particular trick I like to use when peeling my bananas is I normally add a bit of vinegar to the water. Now by adding vinegar, a bit of maybe even 1 tablespoon into maybe wherever you're putting your bananas. Once you add a bit of vinegar, what happens is it stops them from going black. So it's a very, very simple technique. You can also use lemon juice. And then also another trick when you're peeling, if you may be looking at ways of peeling without having to have that slimy thing on your hands, just use a bit of oil and it will be easier to come off. So those are 2 good tips that you managed to take home today, yeah?
Yeah. I normally refuse to prepare matoke because of that.
Because of that. Now, as I mentioned, a very, very simple technique to getting that slime off your hands. Rub a bit of oil on your hands before you begin to slice. You can also rub a bit of oil on the knife. It will be much easier for the stickiness to also not touch on the knife. So it's a very, very simple technique. Now, of course, as we continue to brown our meat, very important that remember in the process of browning, very important to also rest your meat. So we are of course going to take it out very, very shortly. We're going to allow it to rest. Right, so we're going to take this out very quickly. And once your meat has a nice, beautiful brown, almost golden brown color, you basically take it out of the pan and then you allow it to rest. Now the resting part is very important, especially for those of you watching as well. When you allow your meat to rest, it allows the muscles to relax, which means your meat is not tough. So it's actually a very good technique. Like if you're making a stew, brown your meat very quickly in the pan, and then remove it slightly, add it in a little later, it'll be very soft. Right, now to the same pot that we browned our meat, we're also going to be adding our carrots and our onions. And we're going to add just a little bit of oil. So you can stir that for us. Now this particular process, it may look nice and chunky when you begin with, but once you see the final consistency of the dish, you will actually be able to really make an assumption or make a clear, vivid image of what the dish should actually look like. And most of you probably have on many occasions already tried out making your own green bananas. But I'm of course going to be showing you a very, very simple take that I managed to bring with me to the studios today. just to give you a different take on how to make that very, very simple matoke recipe. Now, as we continue to work on this, I don't know how often have you had matoke or how often do you have matoke?
Not so often.
Not so often. Yeah. So I hope with this recipe will convince you to have it more often, yeah?
Yeah.
Hoping so, yeah?
I'm planning on preparing it soon.
Perfect. Now, also something to mention, we're also going to be giving it a bit of color, so which you'll be able to see a little later, which we're going to be using turmeric. We're also going to be incorporating some of our spices at this stage. So I'm going to just pull them closer to us.
Is it advisable to use grated carrots?
No, actually we are going to be using two sides of the carrot. I'm going to be using the grated carrot to incorporate to our recipe a little later. This is just going to give it a nice color with, of course, a bit of some chopped coriander. But I like to use the chunky ones to really give the dish a color. Remember, especially with bananas, it's seemingly going to have too much of one color, so it'll be just plain white. So, of course, to give it a nice, beautiful color, we're going to use a bit of turmeric to give it a bit of a nice yellow. And the carrot is basically going to give it a little hint of some reddish to orangish color to give a nice, beautiful balance to the dish.
Awesome.
All right, now as Sly continues, of course, the carrots and onions are already nicely sweated out. We're also going to proceed to add our cooked peas. I'm also going to add my cumin powder at this stage. And this is basically to give the dish a nice, beautiful aroma. I'm also going to be adding my chili flakes. That's also going to give it a nice, beautiful kick of heat. And I'm also going to be adding some sprigs of some fresh thyme. This you can, of course, buy at your local stores or local markets. If you, of course, can't be able to find this available, or if it's not available to you, you can, of course, use different other kinds of fresh herbs, maybe even rosemary. It's going to give it a nice, beautiful, full-on flavor. Now we're going to add a small dash of oil just to make sure our pan is not too dry. And of course, while you're sauteing, very important to also add your tomato paste at this stage. This is, of course, to aid in allowing for the tomato paste to cook off first of all. And it's also going to allow for the tomato paste to actually absorb nice and quick. And now, just to cool things down, we're of course going to add just a little bit of water. This is basically going to aid in cooking our carrots a little faster, break down the spices, and of course combine the tomato paste. But we are of course going to take a very, very quick break at this stage. I am of course going to come back a little later and proceed to show you what, or rather how all these other ingredients will come together. But very important to mention, you should of course be able to cook this for anywhere between 10 minutes at medium heat. And of course check for doneness by pricking with maybe a sharp knife or a fork. You can of course prick through your carrot just to make sure it's nice and tender before we add the rest of our ingredients. And of course I will also show you the process of taking out the bananas and the potatoes and of course incorporating them to our sauce that we've already begun. So please don't touch that dial. We'll be right back. Hello viewers and welcome back. For those of you who are just catching up, we are pretty much wrapping up a very, very simple matoke dish. So Sly, will you do us the favor of bringing the matoke to this end? Now what you're going to do is you'll just pour everything into the strainer. So just pour everything in there. Perfect. Then you can put that back on the top. Right, now pretty much once the water is drained, You will of course allow that for anywhere between half a minute to a minute to just drain off completely. And then we'll of course continue to add it onto the mixture that we already began. But very important that you add all the ingredients that are still remaining before you proceed, because having that you've already partly cooked the potatoes and the bananas, it of course means it's going to be much easier to finish the dish. So to this Sly, we're going to add our meat. So you can give that a mix. We're also going to be adding to that a bit of our turmeric and a bit of our paprika powder. So this you can actually measure out about half a teaspoon of the paprika powder. And you can measure out as well about 3/4 teaspoon of your turmeric powder. And remember, the turmeric is basically a beautiful enhancer for color and for appearance.
What will happen if you put more?
What would happen is you'd have a very yellow dish, and it may actually not, it won't even make sense to look at it because it'll be too yellow. And what happens is, I don't know if you've seen it on occasion, there is a few vendors that used to do it in Nairobi, where you'd actually see these colored potatoes that have been, I think,
big ones.
The big potatoes. I think you've seen how red they look at times, and they actually look scary. Yeah. So what happens is sometimes a bit of color is good, but as we say it as chefs, too much color is also doubting, because what happens is when something is of course very brightly colored, it could mean two things. Either something went wrong with the dish and someone added color to mask the mistake, or maybe this person just put too much and they just decided since they can't remove the color, they're just going to let it sit in there. So very important to always remember, ladies and gentlemen out there, if you are going to be adding food color to any particular food items, try and be very modest. Of course, make sure a red looks like a red, a yellow looks like a yellow, because if you have too much color as well, as I said, it's also visually hard to enjoy the meal. You know, if you're looking at a dish, for instance, and it's so bright red, you actually, and then another thing as well, remember, too much color on the food means as well too much color on you. So what happens is you're actually going to pretty much have maybe your mouth brightly colored in this particular food color for the rest of your day. Right, so simple as that. Once our turmeric and our paprika is in there, we're going to now add our grated carrots.
I wanted to ask, can you use cinnamon in this dish?
Well, I would recommend maybe changing the variations of the rest of the spices that we used, if you will add cinnamon. But I do know if you are, of course, going to incorporate cinnamon, I would recommend do it maybe if you're making a sweeter version of a dish like this. Maybe if you're making, maybe if you're working with ripe bananas, cinnamon will do a very good job, because cinnamon, of course, enhances sweetness. So what would happen if you add cinnamon to a dish such as this? Remember, it's already savory, it has meat and vegetables. So it would basically almost be as awkward as having sugar with fries. You know, you'll just notice there's something that it's not supposed to be there. But if you are, of course, going to be working with maybe grilled or maybe fried ripe bananas, cinnamon is a very good addition.
Yeah, I also wanted to ask, is there a substitute for cumin?
Not really, unless of course if you're looking at maybe mixed spices, which of course will entail cumin. Cumin is particularly based on, or rather its main function is to give it a beautiful aroma. So you can of course alternate any of the other spices, but of course I would say maybe stay away from spices that are more towards sweet. So maybe anything close to cinnamon you can avoid, but you can go with a bit of cardamom. That's almost on the sweeter end, but not so sweet. And of course, you can also try many of the other spices out there.
So you can even use lemon. We say lemon, lemonata.
Well, I haven't tried it, but maybe you can try it at home and then you can let us know. Yeah, you can just write back to us at studio and you can say, Chef Andy, I put lemon in my matoke and this is how it was.
I'll try.
Well, you can actually try it, but because of the fact that I do have a lemon around, I'm actually going to make it very interesting. So what we'll do is, before we serve, or once we've plated, I'm actually going to allow you to infuse with a bit of lemon and tell us what you think, yeah? Perfect. Right, now our mixture is pretty much nicely, beautifully simmered. I'm just going to give it a check. And right up at the point where your liquid is just almost at the surface of your mixture, and your carrots are nice and soft, your peas are nice and puffed and juicy, and your meat is of course incorporated in the mixture, you can proceed to add your potatoes and your bananas. So you can proceed to add those. And you can also just hold a spoon like this on the side, and then you can pour right against a spoon. That will always make sure that it doesn't splash. Just keep pouring. Perfect. Right, so you can give that a mix very, very gently. And while Sly does so, I'm also going to grab our fresh coriander leaves. I'm just going to chop that as finely as I can. Now this will of course bring about a nice beautiful burst of color to the dish. It also brings a beautiful balance of flavors, and it also brings in a nice beautiful freshness to your dish. Right, so into that goes about 2 whole tablespoons of some fresh chopped coriander.
I am noting that the color of the potatoes is kind of changing.
Yeah, actually now once the potatoes go in, they'll actually start to absorb the turmeric. And at this stage what happened is we allowed the turmeric to infuse with the sauce a little earlier. So as soon as the potatoes go in, they're just going to absorb the color. So this is particularly why I'd mentioned another thing is, remember you're looking at that beautiful balance of colors. So even by just grabbing a spoonful of the mixture, you can be able to see how much green is in there, how much orange is in there. So that creates a beautiful balance. Now, if this mixture was much darker, much intense in the yellow color, what would happen is you'd actually not be able to tell the difference between the banana and the potatoes because it would be too much. But as you notice now, you'll realize the color is just enough and the balance is also nice and beautiful. So I would say if you're looking at coloring your food, it shouldn't go past egg yellow. You know, when you whip up an egg, it shouldn't go past there. But if you go past it, of course, then there's alterations, or there's different recipes that call for different consistencies of color. So you may, of course, look at things like maybe viazi karai in the coast. It will, of course, be in a brighter yellow color than this. So that will, of course, call in for food color that is pretty much maybe store-bought, or it's the more industrial one. So very important to also differentiate. Viewers at home, be sure to also make a big differentiation between yellow or orange food color and turmeric. On most occasions, I have noticed people who actually took the food color and assumed it was turmeric. And now what happens if you purchase food color from a store, the one maybe like the food color we use in pastries, it will actually color your hands. So you may actually have to walk around with yellow fingertips for about 3 days. So very important to mention, be sure to make sure if you're using food color, try and use food color that is ideal for whatever purpose you're using it for. And of course, if you're going to be using the more industrial food colors, remember those could actually be very, very potent. They can actually be very, very dark, or rather very intense in color. And this could actually result in you even having blue plates, blue spoons. Like the color it literally touches on everything that it comes across. But you're of course much safer with turmeric. It of course comes from a root of a turmeric plant, so it's a little easier and safer.
So speaking of egg yellow, the people who eat maybe kienyeji eggs and there's a yellow in the kienyeji eggs and normal eggs, there's a yellow in the normal eggs. So which yellow do you recommend?
I would say, well, for me I prefer free-range eggs, which is the kienyeji ones that you refer to. But then of course the only problem is they're not also easy to use as compared to broiler eggs. So you see, for instance, broiler eggs are the ones that you'll normally see everyone using them for omelets and stuff like that, because they contain a bit more fat content and a bit more water. But what happens is with free-range eggs, they're a little hardy. So what happens is it may not have that intense yellow color, because then again the chickens are not fed on chicken mash. They're also fed on organic things like vegetables and stuff like that. Yeah. Any other question? Perfect. Now, of course, to finish off this very simple dish, Very important to always remember to add some salt to your dish. And of course, very importantly, crush in a bit of some black peppercorns. If of course you have some, a good alternative to that could be black pepper powder. Remember, that brings a nice, beautiful balance. And of course, combined with a bit of salt, it will of course give a nice, beautiful, uplifting flavor to the dish. And it will of course help you taste, make sure that you're able to taste all the ingredients that you incorporated to your dish. But of course, we have come to the last and final part, and our matoke is now ready. So pretty much we're looking at about 45 minutes for this, for the full process of cooking. But of course, as I mentioned, I did use some very small sized green bananas. There are more bigger sized bananas out there in the market. They'll of course call for a little more cooking time. So I will of course always recommend, do not rely fully on your clock or your timer. Be sure to always try and use even your observation, maybe a fork, a sharp knife, just prick your ingredients. As long as you can be able to prick, and of course also make sure it also comes out as easily as you pricked it. So if you prick and you can be able to lift and it still holds on to your fork or your knife, then it means it needs more cooking time. So basically by pricking we mean it should just go in and slide out just the way it went in. But if you're struggling to push it in or struggling to remove it, then it means give it a bit more time. Perfect. Right, so we of course at the last and final part of our plating. I'm just going to turn that down completely and we'll grab a ladle to be able to serve that with.
Can this dish be prepared without the turmeric?
Yes, you can actually do it without the turmeric. It will of course not have an intense color as this one has. It'll probably be more geared towards a more whitish color. But as I said, the option for adding food color to any particular dish is only up to you. So you can of course incorporate more ingredients or you can actually make them less. You can basically twist the recipe to whatever you like. Perfect. Right, now before I plate this dish of ours, of course I did mention you are going to give us an idea, or rather you're going to give us your take on what it tastes like with lemon. So I'm just going to cut a wedge of lemon really quick. Right, so what we're going to do is we're going to just squeeze out some of the juice. Right, simple as that. All right, so now basically what we're going to do is you're going to give us a taste. So we're going to grab a plate at the bottom here. And out of this, we're actually going to allow you to give it a taste. And you're going to tell us what you think of matoke with lemon juice, yeah?
Yeah, my curiosity.
Your curiosity is biting intensely. Right, so I'm going to scoop a little bit of that. And what I will do is I'm going to scoop to that. Ladies and gentlemen, for those of you who are watching, you may of course want to pay attention to this. It may actually be the unveiling of a very, very new recipe. So do give it a taste, but it is hot. I'll remind you it's a bit hot. And while Sly continues to taste our very simple matoke, I'm also going to proceed to plate the rest into the bowl in front of us. So very important, give it a nice mix before proceeding to plate. And you can of course proceed to scoop everything into your plate. Of course, also very important to mention, always try and plate realistic and more nutritionist recommended sizes. So for this, I'm going to serve about 300 to 400 grams. That should do for that particular chunk. And simple as that, very, very simple garnishing. For that, I'm just going to grab a small sprig of some fresh coriander. And I'm just going to set that right over the top like that, bringing us, of course, to the last and final part of our matoke. But maybe we can...
My results. Because of the paprika, it's hot, but because of the lemon, it's sweet.
So we can actually add a lemon to this recipe, yeah? So, of course, for those of you who've been taking notes so far, remember you can actually improvise with some of the beautiful ingredients that we have been mentioned to. And as Sly has mentioned, we should actually be able to serve that with a bit of lemon. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to allow you to claim this recipe from me by serving it with a lemon wedge on the side. So just be sure to always remove the pip from the lemon. And you can, of course, place some 2 wedges of lemon on the side. And of course, that, ladies and gentlemen, is our final take, our very simple take on a very, very simple homemade matoke with meat. Now, we of course thank you once again for tuning in with us this far. Remember, you can of course write back to us with any questions or comments, and you can be able to do that through our Facebook page, that's BrandPlus TV Kenya. Remember, if you also missed out on this, you can recap on this and many more other episodes through our YouTube channel, that's BrandPlus TV Kenya. But from the studios, I will of course wish you a lovely evening, bidding you all farewell, and until the next episode, do remain blessed, have a lovely evening, and see you soon.